So I'm going to take a look at the discussion and try and connect the discussion to what you're doing this week to help you look at what are we actually trying to get to in the discussion questions. So this is a similar quadratic, not the same one that you're doing. It's a very similar one. And what you've learned about this week is you've learned about the vertex, which would be here. I'm using Desmos.com to graph this. You've learned about the axis of symmetry, which would be the line that goes through the vertex. And you've also learned about maximums and minimums. What the discussion is actually before we know those things. And so sometimes we get into the knowledge path before we get into the discussion, and so it becomes confusing because you want to make the discussion about the vertex or the axis of symmetry when it's actually not. So if I'm looking at the letters in my name, I have 5 letters in my name. So when I'm plugging in those 5 letters, I'm not finding the vertex or the axis of symmetry or doing the quadratic formula. I'm just replacing x with 5 to figure out what that number is. So I'm not going to show this here. You would use the Web 2.0 calculator, but if I plugged in 5, the point on the graph at 5, I'm trying to get there, 77.5 would be what I would get out. Okay, so if I plug 5 in to my equation, so I do negative 0.5 times 5 squared plus 12 times 5 plus 30, it gives me this point right here at 577.5. And as we compare my name to other people's names, we should see that these values are going to cycle. They're going to go up and reach this maximum point, but then let's say somebody has more than 12 letters. So my middle daughter is Sarah Rochelle, all one name. So she has a lot of characters in her name. So somebody that has, say, 14 letters or 16 letters, let's say 16, they're going to plug in and get 94 out. And so they have 94 with more letters than my 5. My 5 puts me at 77. And so what's interesting about this is logically, when we think about plugging in larger and larger numbers into an equation, our logic tells us, well, the bigger the number I plug in for x, the larger the number I should get out. But when we start looking at everyone's name and what they're getting out of it, you may have more letters and actually get a lower number. So let's say I have some insanely long name. It's 21 letters. So maybe I'm putting my first and my last name together. If I have 21 letters, I'm going to get 61.5, which is far less than 77.5 for my 5 letters. So what we were trying to connect is this idea that the parabola, as we're plugging in numbers, they reach this maximum point and then they go back down. So what we're trying to do is when we were dealing with linear equations, it always went up or it always went down. The larger or smaller the x values. With a parabola, it cycles. It goes up and back down, which is actually what describes the graph. So that's the connection between what we were doing in the knowledge path and what we're really trying to get you to see in the discussion is that a parabola is different from a line because it's not always increasing or always decreasing. When we start plugging in those different values, it's going to get larger numbers, but there's going to be some maximum point, and then it's going to go back down, those y values. So remember, the x value is the input, the y value is the output. And if you're looking at the whole discussion and everyone's names, then we're going to start to see that there's a little bit of a cycle, and that's okay. So sometimes you might be doing the discussion and think you're wrong because you got a smaller number than somebody else, but you're not, because the parabola is going to go up and then back down. So I hope that makes the connection for you and helps give you a better understanding of what's happening in that discussion.